Today we are going to talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. From the perspective of the original Hebrew language used in the Torah. Many believers today have been taught that the Bible is talking about removing yeast. But when we carefully examine the Hebrew words used in the scriptures, we discover something more precise. The Torah actually uses two important Hebrew terms when speaking about leaven. The first word is seor, written in Hebrew as seor. Seor does not mean yeast in the modern scientific sense. Instead, seor refers to a piece of fermented dough kept from a previous batch of bread in ancient baking. When dough had fermented and risen, a baker would remove a small portion of that dough and save it. That piece would later be mixed into a new batch of dough. Once mixed in, it would cause the entire batch to ferment and rise. Today we might call this a sourdough starter. So seor was the starter dough that caused fermentation in bread. The second Hebrew word used in the Torah is chametz, written chametz. Chametz refers to bread or dough that has already become leavened. In other words, chametz is the result of fermentation. So the Torah makes a clear distinction. Is the cause of fermentation. Chametz is the product of fermentation. We see this clearly in the commandments concerning the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In Exodus 12:15 it says, 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread, even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. The Hebrew word used there refers to seor, the starter dough used for fermentation. Then in Exodus 12:19 the scripture says, for 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. Again, the Hebrew word refers to seor, the starter dough. The command was to remove the source of fermentation and to avoid eating chametz, the leavened bread produced from it. Instead, the people were commanded to eat matzot, unleavened bread. Matzot is bread made without allowing the dough to ferment and rise. This command connects directly to Israel's departure from Egypt. In Exodus 12:39, the scripture explains that the Israelites baked unleavened cakes because their dough had not had time to rise when they left Egypt in haste. So every year the Feast of Unleavened Bread reminds Israel of that moment of deliverance. But there is an important detail many people overlook. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the scriptures do not forbid wine. Wine was still consumed during this feast. Wine is produced through fermentation, and fermentation requires yeast. When grapes are crushed, natural yeast on the skins of the grapes begins converting the sugars into alcohol. Without yeast, grape juice cannot become wine. Yet the scriptures clearly show that wine was accepted in Israel. In Psalm 104:15, it says that wine makes glad the heart of man. Wine was also used as a drink offering before the Most High in Numbers 15:5. Wine is mentioned as part of the offerings presented before God. This shows that fermentation itself was not forbidden. What the Torah prohibited during the Feast of Unleavened Bread was the intentional fermentation of grain dough used to make leavened bread. That fermentation came from seor, the starter dough, and the bread produced from it was chametz.
Wine fermentation,
however, comes from natural yeast on grapes, not from seor. That is why wine could still be consumed during the feast. Even during the Passover meal that begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread, wine was present. In Luke 22:17-20, when Yeshua kept the Passover with his disciples, the scripture says he took the cup and gave thanks. That cup was wine shared during the Passover meal. So understanding the Hebrew terms helps remove much of the confusion that exists today. Seor is the starter dough that spreads fermentation.
Chametz is the bread that has already risen.
and matzah is bread made without fermentation. The command during the Feast of Unleavened Bread was to remove the started dough and avoid leavened bread for 7 days. But fermentation itself was not forbidden, as shown by the continued use of wine. When we return to the original Hebrew language, the scriptures become clearer, and many misunderstandings disappear.